Ambassador Sarah Chun adjusted her perfectly pressed navy suit as she walked through the crystalline corridors of the Galactic Council station. Her heels clicked softly against the bioluminescent floor, a sound that seemed unnaturally sharp in the hushed atmosphere of interstellar diplomacy. Around her, beings from dozens of worlds moved with the careful grace of those who understood that every gesture carried the weight of entire civilizations. The human delegation had arrived 3 standard cycles ago for the most important gathering in galactic history. Representatives from over 200 species had converged to address the growing threat of the Vorthan Empire, a militaristic civilization that had been expanding aggressively across the Outer Rim territories. What made this meeting unprecedented wasn't just the scale of the threat, but the fact that humanity had been invited to participate. Humans were still considered the new kids on the galactic block. They had achieved faster-than-light travel only 57 years ago, practically yesterday in galactic terms. Most species had taken centuries or even millennia to develop such technology. The Zenthri had taken 4,000 years. The aquatic nebulans had required nearly 6 millennia of gradual technological evolution. Humans had done it in less than 2 centuries from their first powered flight. This rapid advancement had caused considerable unease among the established galactic powers. Some viewed humans with suspicion, wondering what corners they had cut or what dangerous technologies they might be hiding. Others saw them as useful, but ultimately insignificant, a young species that could serve as cannon fodder in the coming conflict with the Vorthans. Sarah paused at a massive viewport overlooking the swirling nebula that housed the neutral station. She had spent the last week in preliminary meetings, carefully navigating the complex web of galactic politics. The Karathi Empire, one of the oldest and most influential civilizations, had made it clear they viewed humans as barely more than primitive barbarians who had stumbled upon space travel through luck rather than wisdom. The silicon-based crystalline collective saw humans as chaotic and unpredictable, a species whose emotions made them unsuitable for serious diplomatic work. Ambassador Chun. A melodious voice called from behind her. She turned to see Veltar, the chief diplomat of the Ethereal Consortium. The Ethereals were beings of pure energy who maintained physical forms only for the convenience of interacting with corporeal species. Veltar appeared as a shimmering humanoid outline filled with swirling galaxies of light. Veltar, Sara inclined her head respectfully. I trust the morning session went well. As well as can be expected when the Karathi delegation spends half their time questioning whether your species should even be present for these discussions. The Ethereal's form pulsed with what Sarah had learned to recognize as amusement. They seemed particularly concerned about your military capabilities. Sarah's expression remained neutral, but inside she felt a familiar frustration. Humanity's military had been deliberately downplayed in all official communications with the galactic community. The official records showed that humans had a modest space force of 1,200 ships, primarily designed for exploration and light patrol duties. What the records didn't show was that this represented less than 15% of Earth's actual military capacity. I'm sure their concerns are understandable, Sarah replied diplomatically. We're all working toward the same goal, protecting our civilizations from Vorthan aggression. Indeed, Veltar's form shifted, and Sarah caught what might have been approval in the Ethereal's energy patterns. Though I must say, your species has a fascinating approach to diplomacy. Most young civilizations either grovel before the established powers or bluster with false bravado. Humans seem to do neither. Before Sarah could respond, a deep harmonic chime echoed through the station's corridors, signaling the beginning of the main assembly session. The 2 diplomats made their way toward the central chamber, a vast spherical space where representatives could participate in their preferred atmospheric conditions. The aquatic species occupied sealed pools of various liquid compositions, while methane-breathing beings resided in specialized environmental bubbles. The human delegation took their assigned positions in the standard oxygen-nitrogen section. Admiral James Harrison, the military advisor, sat to Sarah's right, his weathered face betraying nothing of his thoughts. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the xenobiologist and cultural specialist, occupied the seat to her left, her tablet filled with detailed notes on the behavioral patterns of every species present. High Counselor Thexmar of the Karathi Empire rose first, his 4 arms gesturing in the complex patterns that accompanied formal Karathi speech. Honored representatives, His translated words filled the chamber. "We gather in the face of unprecedented threat. The Vorthan Empire has conquered 17 star systems in the past cycle alone. Their technology appears to be advancing at an alarming rate, and their military tactics grow more sophisticated with each engagement." A holographic display materialized in the center of the chamber, showing the latest intelligence on Vorthan movements. Red markers indicated conquered systems, while yellow zones showed territories under immediate threat. Sarah noted that several human colonies lay within the projected expansion path, though they were far from being the primary targets. "Traditional defensive strategies have proven insufficient," Fexmar continued. "The Vorthans adapt quickly to our tactical approaches. They learn from each engagement and modify their strategies accordingly. We need new approaches, unconventional thinking." Zefkai of the Nebular Assembly, her aquatic form undulating gracefully in her specialized environment, projected her thoughts into the translation matrix. "Perhaps it is time to consider more aggressive, preemptive strategies. The Vorthans respect only strength. And what would you know of Strength, Water Dweller?" The harsh, mechanical voice belonged to Groktar, the representative of the Thane Mechanarchy. His cybernetic body towered over most other delegates, a fusion of organic matter and advanced technology that had replaced over 80% of his original biology. "Your people hide in their deep oceans and emerge only when it suits them." The insult triggered a cascade of defensive posturing from the Aquatic Coalition, while the Thane delegation responded with their own aggressive displays. Sarah watched the proceedings with growing concern. This was exactly the kind of fragmentation that would doom any coordinated resistance to the Vorthans. "If I may," Sarah stood, her voice cutting through the rising cacophony. The chamber fell silent, more from surprise than respect. Young species rarely spoke without being directly addressed, and never interrupted disputes between established powers. "Ambassador Chun." Fexmar's tone carried clear disapproval. The human delegation was invited as observers. "This discussion involves matters of military strategy that require experience your species lacks." Sarah's smile never wavered, though those who knew her well might have recognized the subtle shift in her posture that preceded what her military colleagues called diplomatic warfare. "High Counselor, I appreciate your concern for our inexperience. However, I believe that perspective might be exactly what this situation requires." She gestured toward the holographic display. "Every species here has approached the Vorthan problem from the framework of traditional galactic warfare: large fleets, territorial control, conventional tactics. The Vorthans have proven they can adapt to and counter these approaches. Perhaps it's time to consider the perspective of a species that developed its military doctrine through 5,000 years of constant warfare with itself." The statement sent ripples of shock through the assembly. Most species achieved spaceflight only after resolving their internal conflicts and developing unified planetary governments. The idea that humans had reached the stars while still maintaining separate nations and military forces was deeply disturbing to many galactic civilizations. Dr. Vasquez leaned forward slightly, adding her voice to Sarah's argument. "The Vorthans' adaptation strategy is impressive, but it assumes certain constants about their opponents. They expect logical, predictable military doctrine based on established galactic norms. Human warfare evolved in an environment where unpredictability was often the difference between survival and extinction. You speak of unpredictability as a virtue." The crystalline being known as Shardax interjected, his silicon body refracting the chamber's light into rainbow patterns. "Chaos is not strategy. It is simply chaos." Admiral Harrison finally spoke, his gravelly voice carrying the weight of decades of military command. "Respectfully, Shardax, what you call chaos we call adaptation. Human military history is filled with examples of smaller, weaker forces defeating larger, more advanced enemies through unconventional tactics and psychological warfare." Psychological warfare? Veltar's energy form pulsed with curiosity. An interesting concept. The Vorthans are known for their mental resilience. "Mental resilience against what they understand," Sarah interjected. "But humans have developed forms of psychological operation that might be entirely outside their experience. We've learned to weaponize things that other species consider weaknesses: desperation, unpredictability, even apparent retreat." Fexmar's four eyes fixed on Sarah with what might have been interest or concern. You suggest that humanity could contribute meaningfully to military planning against the Vorthins? I suggest that humanity might approach the problem from angles that haven't been considered, Sarah replied carefully. Our military advisors have been analyzing the Vorthin expansion patterns and tactical responses. We've identified several potential vulnerabilities that stem from their reliance on logical, predictable enemy behavior. The chamber buzzed with translated conversations as delegates discussed this unexpected development. The human delegation had been invited as a courtesy, expected to contribute little more than token support. The suggestion that they might actually have valuable military insights was unprecedented. What specific vulnerabilities have you identified? Groktar demanded, his mechanical components whirring as he leaned forward. Sarah exchanged glances with Admiral Harrison, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. The Vorthins' adaptation strategy requires them to observe and analyze enemy tactics over multiple engagements. This creates a dependency on pattern recognition and logical extrapolation. Human military doctrine includes specific techniques for exploiting such dependencies. Elaborate, Thexmar commanded. Deception campaigns that present false patterns for the enemy to analyze. Tactical approaches that appear to be one thing while actually being another. Strategic retreats that aren't actually retreats. Forms of psychological pressure that force enemies to make decisions based on fear rather than logic. Dr. Vasquez pulled up a series of historical examples on her tablet, which were translated and displayed for the assembly. Human history includes numerous examples of successful campaigns against technologically superior forces. The key is understanding that the enemy's strengths can often be turned into weaknesses. The ethereal Veltar's form brightened with what Sarah recognized as intense interest. You speak of strategies that sound almost predatory. The word hung in the air, and Sarah realized that Veltar had stumbled onto something significant. Most galactic species had evolved past their predatory instincts during their development of sapience. They had become peaceful, cooperative beings who resolved conflicts through negotiation and logical discourse. Humans had achieved spaceflight while retaining much of their predatory nature, simply directing it toward external threats rather than each other. Predatory is an interesting way to put it, Admiral Harrison said slowly. Human military doctrine does incorporate concepts from hunting behavior. Stalking, misdirection, patience, the ability to strike from unexpected angles. Most importantly, the willingness to take significant risks when the situation demands it. This is fascinating, Zevkai projected from her aquatic environment. But theory is different from practice. How would such strategies translate to actual engagement with Vorthin forces? Sarah had been hoping someone would ask that question. Admiral Harrison has developed a preliminary operational framework based on our analysis of Vorthin tactics. With the Council's permission, we'd like to present it. The chamber fell silent as delegates considered this unprecedented situation. A species barely 50 years into galactic civilization was offering to present military strategy to powers that had been fighting interstellar wars for millennia. Thexmar's four arms moved in the complex gesture that indicated formal consideration. After several long moments, he spoke. The Karathi Empire is curious about human perspectives. We will hear your presentation. Admiral Harrison stood, his bearing shifting from diplomatic advisor to military commander. The holographic display changed, showing detailed tactical scenarios. The Vorthins have consistently demonstrated superior firepower and defensive capabilities. Direct engagement plays to their strengths. However, they've also shown predictable response patterns to various threats. The display showed a series of Vorthin fleet movements, analyzed and annotated with human tactical assessment. They respond to flanking maneuvers with counterflanking. They answer superior numbers with concentrated firepower. They meet retreat with pursuit. Each response follows logical military doctrine, which is exactly what any competent commander would do, Groktar pointed out. Exactly. Admiral Harrison smiled grimly. Which means they're following a logical decision tree that can be manipulated. Human doctrine includes what we call false flag operations, presenting the enemy with apparent opportunities or threats that are actually traps. Dr. Vasquez added her expertise to the presentation. Our psychological analysis suggests that Vorthins value efficiency and logical progression. This makes them vulnerable to scenarios that force them to choose between competing logical priorities. For example, Admiral Harrison continued, if they're pursuing what appears to be a retreating fleet, but simultaneously facing what looks like an opportunity to capture a strategic installation, their decision-making process becomes more complex. Add a third element, perhaps what appears to be a civilian evacuation in progress, and their logical priorities begin to conflict. The implications were staggering. Instead of trying to match Vorthan firepower, humans were proposing to manipulate their decision-making process itself. You would use their intelligence against them, Shardax observed, his crystalline form refracting the tactical display into prismatic patterns. We would create situations where their intelligence leads them to make decisions that benefit us rather than them, Sarah clarified. Human military history is full of examples where smaller forces defeated larger ones by controlling the terms of engagement. Veltar's energy form pulsed rapidly. This approach requires a fundamentally different understanding of warfare. Most galactic conflicts are resolved through demonstrations of superior capability. You're describing warfare as a form of psychological manipulation. Because that's exactly what it is, Admiral Harrison replied bluntly. Every battle is won in the mind before it's fought in space. If you can control what your enemy thinks about, you can control what your enemy does. The chamber erupted in discussions as delegates grappled with concepts that were entirely foreign to their understanding of civilized conflict. For most galactic species, war was a regrettable necessity that should be conducted with honor and minimal deception. The human approach was something else entirely, a systematic exploitation of enemy psychology for strategic advantage. Sarah watched the reactions carefully, noting which delegates seemed intrigued versus those who appeared disturbed. The ethereals were clearly fascinated, their energy forms brightening with interest. The aquatic nebulans showed signs of approval, perhaps recognizing similarities to their own ambush-hunting ancestry. The mechanized Thane seemed impressed by the systematic nature of the approach. The Karathi, however, appeared deeply unsettled. Their culture valued direct confrontation and honorable combat. The idea of warfare as psychological manipulation challenged fundamental aspects of their worldview. This discussion has been enlightening, Thexmar finally said, his translation carrying undertones of uncertainty. However, theoretical discussions are insufficient. How would you propose to test these unconventional approaches? Sarah had been waiting for this question. The Vorthans have been probing the defenses of the Kepler 442 system for the past 2 cycles. Intelligence suggests they're preparing for a major assault. We propose a joint operation to demonstrate the effectiveness of human tactical doctrine. The suggestion sent shockwaves through the assembly. Joint operations between galactic powers were extremely rare, typically reserved for dire emergencies. For humans to propose leading such an operation was unprecedented. Impossible, Groktar declared. No offense intended, but human forces lack the firepower and experience necessary for engagement with Vorthan battle groups. Which is exactly why it would work, Admiral Harrison countered. The Vorthans have detailed intelligence on every major galactic fleet. They know your capabilities, your standard tactics, your typical response patterns. They have no meaningful data on human forces. Dr. Vasquez highlighted this point with additional analysis. Vorthan intelligence gathering is extremely thorough, but it focuses on known threats. A human force would be operating completely outside their analytical framework. You're suggesting that your inexperience is actually an advantage, Zefkai observed. We're suggesting that our different evolutionary path has produced military capabilities that don't fit standard galactic models, Sarah clarified. The Vorthans won't know how to counter tactics they've never encountered. The debate continued for several more hours, with delegates raising practical concerns about logistics, command structure, and risk assessment. Through it all, the human delegation maintained their calm, professional demeanor, answering questions with detailed analysis, and presenting solutions to every objection. As the session finally drew to a close, Thexmar made a formal announcement. The Karathi Empire will consider the human proposal. We reconvene tomorrow to discuss specific operational parameters. Sarah nodded graciously, but inside she felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. They had succeeded in getting galactic attention, but now they would have to prove that human capabilities match their claims. As the delegates dispersed, Veltar approached the human group. Ambassador Chun, your presentation today was quite remarkable. I'm curious about something, though. Your species seems to approach diplomacy with the same strategic thinking you apply to warfare. Sarah paused, considering her response carefully. Perhaps that's because for humans, diplomacy is just warfare conducted with different weapons. The ethereal's form pulsed with what might have been alarm or admiration. How fascinating, and how terrifying. As they left the chamber, Dr. Vasquez leaned close to Sarah. Do you think they're beginning to understand what they've invited into the galactic community? Sarah's smile was sharp as a blade. Not yet, but they will. The war room aboard the Galactic Defense Coordination Vessel Unity's Promise buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from 12 different species gathered around the massive holodable. 3 days had passed since the historic vote authorizing the first human-led operation in galactic military history. The decision had been closer than anyone anticipated, secured by a margin of only 7 votes after intense lobbying from the Ethereal Consortium and surprising support from the normally isolationist Nebular Assembly. Admiral Harrison stood at the center of the holographic display, his weathered hands moving through tactical configurations with practiced efficiency. The assembled alien officers watched with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism as he outlined the operational framework for what humans had designated Operation Mindfog. The Vorthan assault fleet consists of 47 vessels, including 6 Dreadnought-class warships, Harrison explained, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had commanded space battles while most of the assembled species were still debating whether to trust human technology. Standard galactic doctrine would recommend a defensive fleet of at least 60 vessels to ensure adequate coverage of the Kepler 442 system. Fleet Commander Zaxtel of the Karathi Empire, his 4 arms folded in the gesture that indicated professional disagreement, interrupted with characteristic directness. Admiral Harrison, the combined galactic response force numbers 31 vessels. Even with human reinforcement, we lack the numerical superiority required for conventional engagement. Which is exactly why we won't be using conventional engagement, Harrison replied, his tone suggesting he had expected this objection. Commander, how familiar are you with the human concept of asymmetric warfare? The question caused visible confusion among several delegates. The universal translator struggled with the term asymmetric warfare, rendering it differently for each species based on their closest cultural equivalent. For the Karathi, it came across as something roughly meaning dishonorable combat. The Crystalline Collective received it as a logical battle methodology. Dr. Elena Vasquez stepped forward, her tablet projecting supplementary data onto the holodable. Most galactic civilizations developed their military doctrine around the principle of matched force engagement, similar technologies competing within established parameters. Human warfare evolved differently because we were fighting ourselves for millennia using identical technology bases, but constantly seeking tactical advantages. The holo display shifted to show historical examples from human military conflicts. Images of ancient battles gave way to more recent engagements, each one demonstrating the principle of achieving victory despite technological or numerical disadvantage. The Trojans thought they were safe behind their walls, Dr. Vasquez continued, highlighting a particular historical example. The Greeks convinced them they had won by leaving a gift. The Trojan strength, their fortifications, became the mechanism of their defeat because they couldn't conceive of an enemy that would use deception as a primary weapon. Captain Mordeth of the Nebular Assembly, her aquatic form undulating thoughtfully in her environmental suit, projected her translated thoughts to the group. You're suggesting that the Vorthans suffer from a similar limitation in their strategic thinking? I'm suggesting that every species suffers from limitations based on their evolutionary development, Admiral Harrison replied. The Vorthans evolved on a world where survival depended on logical analysis and efficient resource allocation. Their military doctrine reflects this. They're extremely good at optimizing their forces for maximum effectiveness within known parameters. He gestured, and the holo display showed detailed analysis of Vorthan battle tactics from previous engagements. The alien officers could see the patterns. Logical, efficient, devastatingly effective against conventional opposition. The problem with optimization is that it requires predictable variables, Harrison continued. When you introduce truly unpredictable elements into their calculations, their decision-making process becomes compromised. Fleet Commander Zaxtel's 4 eyes focused intently on the human admiral. Explain unpredictable elements. Sarah Chun, who had been observing the briefing from the back of the room, stepped forward. Commander, What would your response be if an enemy fleet began broadcasting surrender demands while simultaneously charging directly toward your strongest defensive position? I would. Zaxtel paused, his arms moving through the complex calculations that Karathi used for tactical analysis. I would assess the probability of deception while maintaining defensive posture and preparing for multiple contingencies. Exactly, Sarah smiled. You would try to analyze the situation logically. But what if, while you were analyzing, a second enemy force appeared to be retreating in panic from a completely different direction, apparently having been ambushed by a third force that didn't match any known fleet composition? That would be 3 simultaneous tactical situations requiring immediate assessment, the Karathi commander admitted. And while you were trying to process all 3 situations, what if you received intelligence that civilian evacuation ships in the system were under attack by pirates who might or might not be connected to the original battle? Dr. Vasquez added. The Karathi commander's arms moved more rapidly, his species equivalent of stress calculation. Such a scenario would require dividing attention and resources among multiple priorities, each of which would seem to require immediate response according to your military protocols, Harrison finished. That's the essence of what humans call a clusterfuck, forgive the crude term. You create so many simultaneous problems that your enemy's logical decision-making process becomes overloaded. The chamber fell silent as the alien officers grappled with this concept. For species that had evolved past their predatory phases, the idea of deliberately creating chaos as a tactical advantage was profoundly disturbing. Captain Shingvar of the Crystalline Collective, her silicon form refracting the holodable's light into prismatic patterns, finally spoke. This approach seems to require deliberate deception on a massive scale. How does your species reconcile such tactics with ethical conduct? The question hung in the air like a charged particle, and Sarah realized they had reached a crucial moment in galactic human relations. How they answered this would determine whether other species saw humans as valuable allies or dangerous predators to be contained. Captain, Sarah began carefully, human ethics are perhaps more contextual than those of other species. We make distinctions between deception used against enemies who threaten innocent lives and deception used for personal gain. When facing an aggressor like the Vorthan Empire, we consider any tactic that minimizes casualties on our side to be not just acceptable, but morally imperative. Dr. Vasquez added supporting context. Human military doctrine includes extensive study of what we call the rules of engagement. We have strict protocols about when and how deception may be used. The key principle is proportionality. The threat must justify the response. And the Vorthan Empire's expansion certainly qualifies as such a threat, Admiral Harrison stated bluntly. They've already demonstrated their willingness to destroy civilian populations that resist their occupation. Our approach may seem unorthodox, but it's designed to stop them with minimal loss of life on all sides. Fleet Commander Zaxtel's posture shifted subtly, moving from skeptical to thoughtful. Admiral, you mentioned that this operation would demonstrate human tactical capabilities. What specific capabilities will be involved? Harrison's expression became predatory in a way that made several alien officers unconsciously step back. Commander, what I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels of human military intelligence. The official records show that Earth Space Force consists of 1,200 vessels. Those records are incomplete. The admission sent ripples of shock through the assembled officers. Providing false information to the Galactic Council was a serious breach of diplomatic protocol. How incomplete? Captain Mordeth asked, her aquatic form betraying what her species considered extreme agitation. The 1,200 vessels represent our exploration and light patrol forces, Sarah explained smoothly. They're what we deploy for peaceful purposes. Our actual military capacity is significantly larger. Define significantly, demanded Captain Shingvar. Admiral Harrison exchanged glances with Sarah, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Our total Space Force numbers approximately 8,400 vessels, including 312 ships that have no equivalent in known galactic classifications. The silence that followed was profound. The numbers themselves were staggering. Humanity possessed one of the largest space forces in the galaxy despite being relative newcomers to interstellar civilization. But the reference to unknown ship classifications was even more unsettling. Unknown classifications? Fleet Commander Zach Stell's voice carried undertones of what the Universal Translator rendered as deep concern. Humans have developed specialized vessel types based on our particular approach to space warfare, Dr. Vasquez explained. Ships designed for psychological operations, vessels optimized for what we call stealth reconnaissance, and platforms built specifically for creating tactical confusion. Stealth reconnaissance. Captain Moredeath's aquatic form had gone completely still, her species' response to potentially lethal threats. Admiral Harrison called up new displays on holodeck. Most galactic species develop space technology with the assumption that detection was inevitable. Your ships are designed to be visible and impressive, to announce their presence and capabilities. Human ships are often designed to avoid detection entirely. The holographic display showed sleek, angular vessels that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Their designs were unsettling to alien sensibilities, predatory forms that suggested patience, and concealment rather than noble combat. How long have such vessels been operating in galactic space? Captain Shingvar asked, her crystalline form shifting through spectrums of light that indicated extreme alarm. Long enough to gather comprehensive intelligence on Vorthan capabilities, fleet movements, and tactical doctrines, Sarah answered diplomatically. Our presence here isn't just about offering assistance. We've been preparing for this conflict far longer than the official record suggests. The implications were staggering. While galactic powers have been debating response strategies and conducting formal intelligence gathering, humans had apparently been conducting covert operations throughout the contested regions. This intelligence gathering, Fleet Commander Zach Stell said slowly, it would constitute violation of multiple galactic treaties regarding unauthorized surveillance. Only if our vessels were detected, Admiral Harrison replied with what might have been a smile. To our knowledge, they weren't. Dr. Vasquez projected additional data onto the holodeck. Our covert observations have revealed several critical vulnerabilities in Vorthan operations. Their fleet coordination relies on quantum entanglement communication networks that, while extremely secure, have specific operational requirements that can be exploited. Exploited how? Captain Moredeath asked. Quantum entanglement communication requires precisely calibrated relay stations positioned at specific gravitational coordinates, Dr. Vasquez explained. If those stations are disrupted, their fleet coordination becomes significantly degraded. You're talking about sabotage operations behind enemy lines, Captain Shingvar observed. We're talking about asymmetric pressure designed to force the Vorthans into tactical disadvantage, Sarah corrected. Human military doctrine includes extensive protocols for what we call special operations, small unit activities designed to achieve strategic effects disproportionate to the forces involved. Admiral Harrison added tactical details to the presentation. While the main fleet engages Vorthan forces in apparently conventional battle, specialized human units will be disrupting their communication networks, creating false sensor readings to confuse their situational awareness, and implementing what we call psychological pressure campaigns. Psychological pressure campaigns? Fleet Commander Zach Stell's forearms moved in patterns indicating intense calculation. Targeted information designed to make enemy commanders question their intelligence, doubt their tactical assessments, and second-guess their decision-making process, Dr. Vasquez explained. For example, we might broadcast intercepted communications that appear to show dissension within their command structure, or provide false intelligence that suggests they're facing forces much larger than actually present. The alien officers exchanged what their species considered meaningful glances. Each was beginning to realize that they weren't just observing a briefing about human military capabilities. They were witnessing a demonstration of human psychological warfare techniques being applied to their own decision-making processes. The briefing we received 3 days ago, Captain Moredeath said slowly, when Ambassador Chun presented human tactical proposals to the Galactic Council, was itself a form of psychological operation, Sarah confirmed smoothly. We needed to assess galactic response to human military doctrine before committing to joint operations. Your reactions provided valuable intelligence about how different species process tactical information under stress. The admission caused visible discomfort among the assembled officers. They had thought they were evaluating human capabilities, but humans had simultaneously been evaluating them. This conversation, Captain Shingvar's crystalline form flickered through rapid spectrum changes. Is it also a psychological operation? Everything is a psychological operation, Admiral Harrison replied matter-of-factly. The question is whether it's conscious and targeted or unconscious and accidental. Humans prefer conscious and targeted. Dr. Vasquez softened the impact with additional context. The key principle of human psychological operations is that they're designed to achieve specific military objectives with minimal actual violence. We'd rather convince an enemy to surrender than destroy them. It's more efficient, and it reduces casualties on all sides. Fleet Commander Zaxtel's posture shifted again, this time to what Karathi culture recognized as grudging respect. Admiral Harrison, your species' approach to warfare is comprehensive. But how do we know that these techniques will be effective against Vorthins specifically? Harrison's smile became genuinely warm for the first time during the briefing. Commander, we don't just know they'll be effective. We've already tested them. The holodeable display shifted to show recent Vorthin fleet movements in the Outer Rim territories. 3 cycles ago, a Vorthin scouting force encountered what appeared to be a damaged human exploration vessel broadcasting distress signals. The Vorthins, following their standard protocols for intelligence gathering, moved to capture the vessel and interrogate its crew. The vessel was bait, Captain Moordeath concluded. The vessel was extremely sophisticated bait, Dr. Vasquez corrected. It contained fabricated intelligence designed to make the Vorthins believe that human space forces were smaller and less technologically advanced than they actually are. It also included communication logs suggesting that humans were terrified of Vorthin expansion and seeking ways to avoid confrontation. The Vorthins analyzed this intelligence according to their standard procedures, Admiral Harrison continued. They incorporated it into their strategic planning and adjusted their tactical assessments of human capabilities. What they don't realize is that everything they learned about us is carefully crafted misinformation. The implications were profound. The Vorthins believed they understood human military capabilities, but their understanding was based on entirely false information. This meant their tactical planning for any engagement with human forces would be fundamentally flawed. Moreover, Sarah added, our psychological profile of Vorthin command structure suggests they'll be extremely reluctant to admit that their intelligence was compromised. Even when faced with evidence that human capabilities exceed their estimates, their cultural protocols will resist accepting that they were deceived. Captain Shingvar's form had stabilized into a deep blue spectrum that her species used to indicate profound contemplation. Ambassador Chun, your species has been planning this conflict for far longer than your official presence in galactic affairs would suggest. We've been planning for the possibility of such a conflict since we first achieved faster-than-light travel, Sarah confirmed. Human strategic doctrine includes extensive contingency planning for potential threats, including threats we haven't encountered yet. Which brings us to the current operation, Admiral Harrison said, bringing the briefing back to immediate tactical concerns. The Vorthin assault on Kepler 442 represents the perfect opportunity to demonstrate human military capabilities while achieving meaningful strategic objectives. The holodeable display shifted to show the target system, with detailed tactical overlays showing Vorthin approach routes and defensive positions. The system contains 3 inhabited worlds with a combined population of over 2 billion beings. Standard galactic defensive doctrine would require evacuating non-combatants and establishing defensive perimeters around major population centers. We're going to do something different, Dr. Vasquez continued. The civilian populations will remain in place, but they'll become active participants in the defensive strategy. You're talking about using civilians as military assets, Fleet Commander Zaxtel observed, his tone carrying clear disapproval. We're talking about giving civilians the tools they need to protect themselves while contributing to overall defensive effectiveness, Sarah corrected. Human military doctrine makes extensive use of what we call asymmetric civilian defense, turning apparently vulnerable populations into strategic advantages. Admiral Harrison elaborated on the concept. Civilian communications networks will be used to spread disinformation designed to confuse Vorthin intelligence gathering. Civilian vessels will be equipped with sensor packages that make Vorthin fleet tracking significantly more difficult. Most importantly, civilian populations will be trained to implement Gray Man protocols that make it extremely difficult for occupying forces to identify legitimate targets. Gray Man protocols. Captain Moordeath asked. Techniques for making military assets appear civilian, and civilian assets appear irrelevant, Dr. Vasquez explained. The goal is to create an environment where occupying forces cannot distinguish between genuine threats and background population, forcing them to either treat all civilians as potential enemies or ignore actual military threats. The psychological sophistication of the approach was staggering. Rather than trying to match Vorthan military capabilities directly, humans were proposing to make military occupation so psychologically stressful and operationally complex that Vorthan forces would be unable to function effectively. Admiral, Captain Shingvar said slowly, "Your briefing today has been illuminating, but I must ask directly, how do we know that these same techniques won't be used against galactic allies if human interests diverge from ours?" The question struck to the heart of what every alien officer was thinking. Human capabilities, as described, were so comprehensive and so psychologically sophisticated that they pose potential threats to any civilization that might come into conflict with Earth. Sarah's expression became serious, her diplomatic mask dropping for the first time during the briefing. "Captain, that's exactly the question you should be asking. The answer is that you don't know. You can't know. What you can know is that humans prefer cooperation to conflict, and that our strategic doctrine includes extensive analysis of the long-term benefits of stable alliances. Moreover," Admiral Harrison added, "the techniques I've described require enormous resources and careful preparation. They're not something that can be implemented quickly or casually. Using them against a galactic ally would require humans to make a conscious, long-term commitment to treating that ally as an enemy." Dr. Vasquez provided the final element of reassurance. Human strategic planning operates on much longer timescales than most galactic species realize. We're not just thinking about immediate conflicts, but about the kind of galactic civilization we want to exist in 50 or 100 years from now. Destabilizing our allies would be counterproductive to those long-term goals. Fleet Commander Zach Stell's forearms moved through the complex gesture that Karathi used to indicate acceptance of calculated risk. "Admiral Harrison, the Karathi Empire will participate in Operation Mindfog, but we expect full disclosure of human activities during the engagement." "Understood and agreed," Harrison replied immediately, "though I should warn you that some of what you observe may be unsettling." As the briefing concluded and the alien officers began filing out, Captain Mordeth approached the human delegation privately. "Ambassador Chun, may I ask you a personal question?" "Of course, Captain. Your species achieved spaceflight while still divided into competing nations, correct?" "That's correct. How did you manage to avoid destroying yourselves?" Sarah's smile was sharp as a blade. "Who says we avoided it? We just got very, very good at it." The bridge of the UES Nemesis hummed with controlled energy as Captain Marcus Rivera reviewed the final operational parameters for what would become known as the most decisive engagement in galactic military history. Around him, human officers moved with the precise efficiency of a species that had learned to wage war across every conceivable environment, from the ocean depths of Earth to the vacuum of interstellar space. The Nemesis itself represented everything that had made the galactic powers nervous about human military technology. From the outside, it appeared to be a standard heavy cruiser, roughly equivalent to a Karathi battleship in size and apparent armament. What the external sensors couldn't detect was that nearly 60% of the ship's internal volume was devoted to systems that had no equivalent in galactic naval architecture: electronic warfare suites, psychological operations centers, and what humans euphemistically called special mission packages. "Captain," Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kim reported from the tactical station, "all stealth reconnaissance assets report ready status. The Vorthans still show no indication they've detected our advanced positioning." Rivera nodded, studying the holographic display that showed Vorthan fleet movements throughout the Kepler 442 system. 47 enemy vessels moved in formations that demonstrated the mathematical precision their species was known for: efficient, logical, and completely predictable to anyone who understood their doctrine. "Commander Torres," Rivera called to his psychological operations officer, "status on the disinformation campaign?" Commander Elena Torres looked up from her console, her expression carrying the intense focus of someone managing multiple deception operations simultaneously. "All civilian communication networks in the system are now carrying planted intelligence, suggesting that evacuation efforts are proceeding ahead of schedule. Vorthan intercepts should convince them that the population centers will be largely empty when they arrive." "And the reality?" Rivera asked, though he already knew the answer. Civilian populations are in full compliance with gray man protocols. Every major population center appears deserted while maintaining full defensive readiness. The Vorthans will find themselves attempting to occupy cities that look abandoned but are actually fully operational and extremely hostile to occupation forces. Dr. James Park, the senior xenopsychologist attached to the mission, highlighted additional elements of the operation. Captain, our analysis of Vorthan command psychology suggests they'll interpret the apparent civilian evacuation as evidence that galactic forces are preparing to make a stand at the outer system defensive platforms. They'll expect conventional fleet engagement, which means they'll position their forces for maximum effectiveness against stationary targets, Rivera concluded. Have we confirmed the positions of their command vessels? Confirmed and targeted, Lieutenant Commander Kim replied. The Vorthan fleet flagship is maintaining position in the center of their formation, exactly where their doctrine specifies for optimal command and control. Rivera's smile was predatory. Outstanding. Commander Torres, initiate Phase 1 of the psychological pressure campaign. Throughout the system, carefully positioned human assets began broadcasting what appeared to be intercepted Vorthan communications. The content was subtle, apparent discussions among Vorthan officers about unexpected resistance, concerns about intelligence failures, and growing disagreements about tactical approaches. Each transmission was crafted to sound authentic while gradually undermining confidence in Vorthan command decisions. Aboard the Vorthan flagship Dominion's Edge, Fleet Admiral Kethvar studied the incoming intelligence reports with growing unease. The quantum-encrypted communications from his reconnaissance units indicated that galactic defensive preparations were proceeding differently than expected. The civilian evacuation appears to be nearly complete, reported his intelligence coordinator, a cybernetically enhanced Vorthan whose neural implants allowed direct interface with the ship's analytical systems. However, our deep space reconnaissance has detected unusual energy signatures throughout the system. Define unusual, Kethvar commanded, his four sensory stalks focusing on the holographic display with mechanical precision. The signatures don't match any known galactic military technology. They appear to be some form of distributed sensor network, but the pattern suggests capabilities beyond standard reconnaissance. Kethvar's analytical processors considered this information within the context of established galactic military capabilities. The energy signatures could indicate advanced early warning systems, but their distribution pattern was inefficient according to standard defensive doctrine. Either galactic forces were making fundamental tactical errors, or they were implementing some form of deception. Admiral, his tactical coordinator interrupted, were receiving what appeared to be intercepted galactic command communications. The communications played through the bridge speakers, translated into standard Vorthan protocols. They seemed to show galactic commanders expressing concern about human military capabilities and debating whether to trust human tactical recommendations. The content suggested that the multi-species galactic force was suffering from internal disagreements about strategy. Kethvar's processors analyzed the intercepted communications for authenticity markers. They appeared genuine, which meant that galactic defensive coordination was less effective than initially assessed. This was valuable intelligence, but it also introduced new variables into tactical calculations. Update fleet positioning to account for potential coordination failures among galactic forces, he ordered. If their command structure is compromised, we may be able to exploit gaps in their defensive coverage. What Kethvar couldn't know was that every communication his forces intercepted had been carefully crafted by human psychological operations specialists who understood exactly how Vorthan analytical processes worked. The apparent galactic disunity was entirely fabricated, designed to encourage exactly the kind of tactical adjustments that would position Vorthan forces for maximum vulnerability to human strategic surprises. Aboard the Galactic Coordination Vessel Unity's Promise, Fleet Commander Zaxtel watched human operational methods with a mixture of admiration and deep unease. The level of deception being implemented was staggering in its complexity and psychological sophistication. Admiral Harrison, he said to the human commander, your forces are conducting more simultaneous deception operations than most galactic civilizations implement in entire wars. Admiral Harrison nodded grimly. Commander, this is actually a relatively simple operation by human standards. We're only managing 17 discrete psychological pressure campaigns and 6 major disinformation streams. A full-scale human military operation might involve hundreds of such elements. The casual nature of Harrison's statement sent ripples of shock through the alien officers present. Captain Mordeth's aquatic form had gone completely still, her species' response to encountering apex predators. "Admiral," Captain Shingvar of the Crystalline Collective asked, her form refracting light in patterns that indicated extreme agitation, "how does your species maintain coordination among so many deception operations without losing track of reality yourselves?" Dr. Vasquez answered from the Intelligence Coordination Station. "Humans have developed extensive protocols for what we call operational truth management. Every deception operation is carefully tracked and documented to ensure that our own forces always understand the distinction between real intelligence and fabricated materials. But the psychological impact on your personnel," Captain Mordeth projected, "conducting such extensive deception must be corrupting." "On the contrary," Admiral Harrison replied, "human military psychology recognizes that the ability to compartmentalize different levels of truth is a crucial survival skill. Our personnel are trained to maintain clear ethical frameworks while implementing tactical deception against legitimate military targets." The philosophical implications were staggering. Most galactic species had evolved past the need for such complex deception, but humans had not only retained these capabilities, they had refined them into systematic military doctrine. Phase 1 psychological pressure is showing measurable effects on Vorthan decision-making, Commander Torres reported. Their fleet positioning is shifting toward patterns that optimize against conventional galactic tactics, while creating vulnerabilities to our actual operational plan. "Excellent," Admiral Harrison replied. "Commander Zaxtel, are your forces ready to begin the apparent retreat?" The Karathi commander's forearms moved in a gesture indicating reluctant compliance. "Admiral, the Karathi Empire has never implemented tactical retreat as an opening move in any engagement, which is exactly why it will be effective," Dr. Vasquez explained. "The Vorthans have extensive intelligence on Karathi military doctrine. They know you don't retreat unless facing overwhelming force. When they see your ships pulling back, they'll interpret it as evidence that they've achieved tactical surprise and local superiority. But our retreat will actually be drawing them into predetermined engagement zones where human assets can implement what we call layered tactical surprises," Admiral Harrison added. Captain Rivera's voice crackled through the communication system. "All units, this is Nemesis Actual. Phase 2 is commencing. Galactic forces begin apparent tactical retreat according to predetermined patterns. All stealth assets maintain concealment and prepare for target designation." Throughout the Kepler 442 system, the carefully choreographed dance of Operation Mindfog entered its most critical phase. Galactic ships began pulling back from their defensive positions, their movements suggesting hasty retreat in the face of superior Vorthan firepower. What the Vorthans couldn't detect was that the retreating ships were actually moving into positions that would allow human stealth assets to implement devastating tactical surprises. The Vorthan response was exactly what human tactical analysts had predicted. Fleet Admiral Kethvar ordered his forces to advance rapidly, attempting to prevent galactic forces from establishing new defensive positions. The mathematical precision of Vorthan tactical doctrine demanded that they exploit apparent enemy weaknesses immediately and efficiently. "All units, pursue retreating galactic forces," Kethvar commanded. "Maintain formation integrity and prepare for conventional engagement protocols." What happened next would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for centuries afterward. As Vorthan forces advanced through the apparently empty space left by retreating galactic ships, human stealth reconnaissance assets that had been positioned throughout the system for weeks began activating their specialized mission packages. These weren't weapons in any conventional sense. They were tools designed to attack the enemy's ability to understand what was happening around them. The first surprise came when Vorthan sensors began reporting impossible readings. Ships appeared and disappeared from their displays in patterns that violated known physics. Energy signatures suggested weapons that couldn't exist according to established galactic technology. Most disturbing of all, their own quantum-encrypted communications began carrying messages that their security protocols indicated were both authentic and completely impossible. "Admiral," the Vorthan intelligence coordinator reported, his cybernetic implants struggling to process contradictory data, "our sensors are detecting what appears to be a human fleet of over 200 vessels, but our long-range reconnaissance assets report the human Space Forces number only 1,200 ships total across their entire civilization. That would require them to have committed nearly 20% of their total military capacity to this single engagement, Kethvar's tactical coordinator added. Such deployment would be strategically impossible for a species with their limited resources. Kethvar's analytical processes struggled with the contradiction. Either human military capacity was vastly larger than intelligence reports suggested, or some form of advanced deception technology was creating false sensor readings. Both possibilities required immediate tactical adjustment, but they demanded completely different responses. Admiral, another voice reported, we're receiving communications from what appear to be human vessels requesting our surrender. The content of the communications was delivered in perfect Vorthan protocol, suggesting intimate knowledge of their command structure and cultural preferences. More disturbing, the communications included detailed information about Vorthan fleet composition, officer assignments, and tactical planning that should have been completely secure. How could they have such detailed intelligence about our operations? The intelligence coordinator asked. They couldn't, Kethvar replied grimly. Unless the realization hit the Vorthan command structure like a physical blow. Either their security had been completely compromised for an extended period, or human intelligence gathering capabilities were far beyond anything they had encountered in galactic civilization. Aboard the Nemesis, Captain Rivera watched Vorthan fleet movements with professional satisfaction. Commander Torres, analysis of Vorthan command communications suggests they're beginning to question their intelligence assessments. Confirmed, Captain, Torres replied. Intercepted traffic shows increasing requests for verification of basic tactical intelligence. Their decision-making process is becoming degraded due to information overload and contradictory data. Phase 3, Rivera asked Admiral Harrison through the secure command channel. Initiate Phase 3, Harrison confirmed. Let's show them what human ships actually look like when we stop pretending to be a minor galactic power. Throughout the system, human vessels that had been maintaining false sensor profiles suddenly revealed their true capabilities. Ships that had appeared to be simple patrol vessels began deploying weapon systems that had no equivalent in galactic naval architecture. Vessels that hadn't appeared on sensors at all suddenly became visible, their positions indicating they had been operating undetected within the Vorthan formation for hours. But the most psychologically devastating revelation came when the retreating galactic forces suddenly reversed course and began advancing toward Vorthan positions with tactical precision that suggested extensive coordination and planning. Fleet Admiral Kethvar realized with crystalline clarity that his forces hadn't been fighting a desperate defensive action against a retreating enemy. They had been systematically maneuvered into a tactical environment designed specifically to exploit every known weakness in Vorthan military doctrine. All units, he commanded, immediate tactical withdrawal to defensive positions. But even that option had been anticipated by human tactical planning. As Vorthan forces attempted to withdraw, they discovered that their retreat routes had been seeded with what humans called psychological pressure mines, devices that created false sensor readings and communication disruptions designed to make organized withdrawal extremely difficult. The Vorthan fleet found itself trapped in a tactical environment where every decision seemed to lead to greater disadvantage. Their superior firepower was useless because they couldn't identify legitimate targets among the sea of false sensor readings. Their advanced communication systems were compromised by information that might be authentic intelligence or sophisticated deception. Most critically, their logical decision-making processes were overloaded by tactical situations that didn't fit any established models. Admiral, Dr. Park reported to Harrison, Vorthan command communications indicate complete tactical disorientation. Their analytical processes are unable to generate coherent response strategies. Which means it's time for the final phase, Harrison replied. Captain Rivera, you may proceed with direct engagement. The actual battle lasted less than 4 hours, but its psychological impact would resonate throughout galactic civilization for generations. Human forces demonstrated capabilities that fundamentally challenged every assumption about interstellar warfare. They fielded technologies that most species didn't know were possible, implemented tactics that violated established military theory, and achieved victory against numerically superior forces through methods that bordered on incomprehensible. But perhaps most disturbing to galactic observers was the casual efficiency with which humans had dismantled Vorthan resistance. There was no anger, No vengeance, no unnecessary destruction. Human forces neutralized enemy capabilities with surgical precision, captured enemy personnel according to established galactic protocols, and immediately began implementing humanitarian assistance for Vorthan crew members. It was the warfare of apex predators who had evolved beyond the need for emotional satisfaction from victory. They fought not for glory or dominance, but simply to achieve specific strategic objectives with maximum efficiency and minimum resource expenditure. As the engagement concluded, Fleet Commander Zaxtel found himself studying Admiral Harrison with new understanding. Admiral, your forces just achieved total victory against a technologically superior enemy using tactics that our best military theorists couldn't have conceived. Harrison's response was matter-of-fact. Commander, what you witnessed today was a minor engagement using basic human military doctrine against an enemy we've been studying for months. This wasn't even particularly challenging by our standards. The casual nature of the statement sent shockwaves through the galactic command structure. If this devastating display of military capability represented basic human doctrine applied to a well-understood enemy, what were human forces actually capable of when fully committed and facing unknown threats? Admiral, Captain Shingvar asked, her crystalline form cycling through spectrums that indicated profound existential contemplation. What would have happened if the Vorthans had somehow managed to counter your psychological operations? Harrison's smile was predatory. Captain, we had 17 fallback scenarios prepared, each one progressively more direct. What you observed today was our preference for minimizing casualties while achieving strategic objectives. Our alternatives were considerably less gentle. As reports of the engagement reached the galactic capital, civilizations throughout known space began reassessing their understanding of humanity's place in the galactic community. The species they had dismissed as primitive newcomers had just demonstrated military capabilities that fundamentally challenged the established order of galactic civilization. But perhaps most unsettling was the growing realization that humans had been operating among them for decades, while carefully concealing their true nature. The diplomatic delegations, trade missions, and cultural exchanges that had seemed like the normal activities of a developing civilization were now revealed as sophisticated intelligence-gathering operations conducted by apex predators who had been studying their potential prey. The galaxy was about to learn that humans hadn't joined galactic civilization. They had infiltrated it. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened 18 hours after the conclusion of Operation Mindfog. But the shockwaves from the human demonstration of military capability had already rippled throughout civilized space. High Counselor Thexmar of the Karathi Empire stood before the assembled delegates, his four arms moving through complex gestures that indicated profound disturbance in the natural order. Honored representatives, his translated voice filled the vast chamber. We gather to address revelations that fundamentally challenge our understanding of the species we have welcomed into our community. The holographic display at the center of the chamber showed tactical footage from the recent engagement. Alien delegates watched in stunned silence as human forces demonstrated capabilities that seemed to violate basic principles of galactic military science. Ships appeared and disappeared at will, communications were intercepted and manipulated in real time, and Vorthan forces, among the most tactically sophisticated in known space, were systematically dismantled through methods that bordered on the incomprehensible. The species we knew as humanity, Thexmar continued, has revealed itself to possess military capabilities that exceed those of civilizations with millennia of interstellar experience. More disturbing, they have demonstrated these capabilities through tactics that most of us would consider morally questionable. A ripple of translated murmurs passed through the assembly as delegates processed the implications. The crystalline Shardax spoke first, his silicon form refracting the chamber's light into patterns that indicated deep philosophical disturbance. High Counselor, the tactical recordings suggest that humans implemented over 20 discrete deception operations simultaneously. Such systematic manipulation of enemy psychology requires a species-wide psychological framework that most civilizations would consider pathological. Captain Veltar of the Ethereal Consortium, his energy form pulsing with rapid fluctuations, projected his thoughts into the translation matrix. The implications extend beyond military capabilities. If humans are capable of such sophisticated deception in warfare, What does this suggest about their diplomatic interactions with our civilizations? The question hung in the chamber like a toxic cloud. Every delegate present was suddenly reconsidering every interaction they had ever had with human representatives, wondering what layers of deception might have been present in seemingly straightforward diplomatic exchanges. Ambassador Sarah Chun entered the chamber at that moment, flanked by Admiral Harrison and Dr. Vasquez. Their presence sent visible ripples of unease through the alien delegates. The humans appeared calm, professional, and utterly untroubled by the suspicion and fear their recent actions had generated. "High Counselor," Sarah said, her voice carrying the same diplomatic warmth she had always displayed. "The human delegation appreciates the opportunity to address the Council's concerns about recent events." Ambassador Chun, Thexmar's tone was carefully controlled. "Your species has revealed military capabilities that were deliberately concealed from this council. You have demonstrated tactical methods that many of us find disturbing. Most significantly, you have shown that humanity is capable of systematic deception on a scale that challenges the foundation of galactic diplomatic relations." Sarah's expression remained pleasant, but those who had learned to read human micro-expressions might have noticed the subtle shift in her posture that indicated predatory alertness. "High Counselor, I believe there may be some misunderstanding about human actions and motivations. Perhaps we could address specific concerns." "Very well," Shardax interjected, his crystalline form shifting to project maximum optical intimidation. "First concern, your species provided false information about military capabilities to this council. How do we reconcile such deception with diplomatic integrity?" Dr. Vasquez stepped forward, her academic demeanor unchanged despite the hostility in the chamber. "Representative Shardax, human diplomatic protocols distinguish between classified information and false information. We provided accurate data about the forces we were willing to commit to galactic security operations. We did not provide comprehensive data about total human military capacity because such information is classified for security reasons." Security reasons? The aquatic Zefkai's translated thoughts carried undertones of suspicion. Security against whom? The only significant military threat in this region was the Vorthan Empire, which we were collectively addressing. Admiral Harrison answered with military directness. "Representative Zefkai, human security doctrine requires maintaining strategic reserves and operational secrecy against both known and potential threats. Recent events have demonstrated the wisdom of such policies." "What do you mean by potential threats?" Thexmar demanded. Sarah exchanged glances with her colleagues before answering. "High Counselor, human intelligence analysis suggests that the Vorthan Empire may not have been acting independently. Their recent technological advances and tactical sophistication exceed what their civilization should have been capable of achieving through independent development." The admission sent shockwaves through the assembly. If humanity was suggesting that the Vorthans had been receiving assistance from some unknown external force, the implications for galactic security were staggering. "What evidence supports such an assessment?" Captain Veltar asked, his energy form brightening with intense interest. Dr. Vasquez activated a holographic display showing detailed analysis of Vorthan technology and tactics. "Our examination of captured Vorthan vessels reveals technological components that don't match their established industrial capabilities. More significantly, their tactical doctrine shows influences from military traditions that don't exist in any known galactic civilization." Unknown military traditions? Shardax's form refracting light in patterns that indicated extreme agitation. "What are you suggesting?" "We're suggesting that someone has been teaching the Vorthans to fight," Admiral Harrison replied bluntly. "Someone with military experience that exceeds anything in current galactic civilization." The chamber fell silent as delegates struggled with the implications. The idea that there might be unknown civilizations influencing galactic conflict from behind the scenes challenged fundamental assumptions about their understanding of local space. "Even if such external influences exist," Thexmar said slowly, "this does not justify the systematic deception your species employed against civilizations that considered themselves allies." Sarah's expression became more serious, her diplomatic warmth fading into something that made several delegates unconsciously retreat. "High Counselor, perhaps it's time we address the real concern underlying this emergency session." "Which is?" Thexmar asked. "You're afraid of us," Sarah stated matter-of-factly. You've realized that humans don't fit the model of civilized galactic species, and you're wondering whether we represent a threat to your way of life. The directness of the statement was shocking in diplomatic context. Most galactic species approach such sensitive topics through layers of protocol and indirect reference. Humans, apparently, prefer to address issues head-on. Your recent military demonstration suggests capabilities that exceed most galactic civilizations, Captain Veltar admitted. Combined with your apparent comfort with systematic deception, this does raise questions about human intentions within galactic society. Dr. Vasquez stepped forward again, her academic tone unchanged. Representatives, perhaps it would be helpful to understand the evolutionary context that shaped human military and diplomatic capabilities. Explain, Shardax demanded. Most galactic species achieve spaceflight only after evolving past their predatory phases and developing unified planetary governments, Dr. Vasquez began. Humans achieved spaceflight while still maintaining competitive nation-states and active military conflicts. This required us to develop military and diplomatic capabilities under constant existential pressure. What Dr. Vasquez is saying, Admiral Harrison added, is that humans learned to fight and negotiate while our survival as a species was constantly at stake. Most of you learned these skills as academic exercises after achieving security. For us, they remain survival skills. The distinction was profound. Galactic civilizations had developed their military and diplomatic capabilities as tools for managing peaceful expansion and resolving minor conflicts. Humans had developed theirs as weapons for species survival against other humans who possessed equivalent intelligence and technology. This evolutionary difference explains why human capabilities seem so advanced, Sarah continued. We didn't have the luxury of developing peaceful, logical approaches to conflict resolution. We had to develop methods that worked against opponents who were just as intelligent, just as motivated, and just as capable of deception as we were. But surely, HFY projected, achieving spaceflight should have reduced these survival pressures and allowed your species to develop more civilized approaches. Sarah's smile was sharp. Representative HFY, humans have been in space for 57 years. That's approximately 2 human generations. Evolutionary adaptations that took millions of years to develop don't disappear in 50 years just because the environment changes. The implications were staggering. Humans weren't just a young species that happened to be good at warfare. They were apex predators who had recently gained access to interstellar technology while retaining all their predatory instincts and capabilities. Ambassador Chun, Thexmar said carefully, are you suggesting that humans are incapable of developing more civilized approaches to conflict resolution? Not incapable, Sarah replied. Unwilling. Human analysis of galactic civilization suggests that civilized approaches to conflict resolution work only when all parties agree to abide by civilized constraints. When facing opponents who don't respect such constraints, like the Vorthan Empire, more direct methods become necessary. And you consider yourselves qualified to determine when such methods are necessary? Captain Veltar asked. Admiral Harrison's response was blunt. We consider ourselves uniquely qualified to recognize predatory behavior, because we are predators ourselves. The admission sent ripples of shock through the chamber. Most galactic species went to great lengths to distance themselves from their evolutionary origins as predators. Humans were openly acknowledging and embracing their predatory nature. Admiral, Shardax said slowly, your statement suggests that humans view other galactic species as potential prey. Not potential prey, Dr. Vasquez corrected. Potential allies who need protection from actual predators. What's the difference? HFY asked. The difference, Sarah explained, is that predators protect their territory and their resources from other predators. We have no interest in hunting galactic civilizations because you're not competing with us for resources we actually need. But we have significant interest in preventing external predators from destabilizing the galactic community that we're now part of. External predators, like the Vorthans? Thexmar asked. The Vorthans were never the real threat, Admiral Harrison replied. They were a weapon being used by someone else. The real threat is whoever was teaching them to fight and providing them with technology beyond their indigenous capabilities. Dr. Vasquez activated additional holographic displays showing intelligence analysis that human forces had gathered during the recent engagement. Our examination of Vorthan command structures reveals evidence of external advisors with tactical knowledge that doesn't match any known galactic military tradition. More specifically, Sarah added, tactical knowledge that suggests experience with fighting opponents who use deception, psychological warfare, and asymmetric tactics as primary weapons. The implication was clear and terrifying. Somewhere beyond known galactic space, there were civilizations with military experience fighting opponents like humans. The Vorthan Empire had been their test case for developing tactics that could counter human-style warfare. You're suggesting that humanity's arrival in galactic civilization was anticipated by hostile external forces? Captain Veltar asked, his energy form pulsing with patterns that indicated profound alarm. We're suggesting that someone out there knows what humans are capable of and has been preparing countermeasures, Admiral Harrison confirmed. The Vorthan expansion wasn't random aggression. It was a probing attack designed to test galactic defensive capabilities and gather intelligence about human military doctrine. Which means, Dr. Vasquez continued, that the real conflict hasn't started yet. What you witnessed at Kepler 442 was essentially a training exercise. The chamber fell into stunned silence as delegates processed the implications. They had been viewing the Vorthan threat as a major crisis requiring unprecedented galactic cooperation. Humans were suggesting it had been a minor skirmish designed to gather intelligence for much larger conflicts to come. Ambassador Chun, Thexmar said slowly, if your analysis is correct, what do you recommend as appropriate galactic response? Sarah's expression became predatory in a way that made every alien delegate unconsciously retreat. High Counselor, we recommend that galactic civilizations stop pretending that civilized approaches to conflict resolution will be sufficient for what's coming. Meaning what specifically? Shardax asked. Meaning that you're going to have to let us teach you how to fight like predators, Admiral Harrison replied. Because that's what's coming for you, and you won't survive it by being civilized. Dr. Vasquez added supporting analysis. Human projections suggest that external forces will attempt multiple infiltration and subversion operations against galactic civilizations over the next several cycles. Traditional diplomatic and military responses will be insufficient because they assume your opponents will operate according to civilized constraints. What you need, Sarah concluded, is allies who understand how to fight enemies that don't respect civilized rules of engagement. Allies who can teach you to recognize deception, implement counterintelligence operations, and conduct warfare against opponents who will use your civilized nature against you. Allies like humans, Thexmar observed. Allies exactly like humans, Sarah confirmed. The question is whether galactic civilization is prepared to accept the kind of allies you actually need rather than the kind of allies you're comfortable with. The challenge was laid out starkly. Galactic civilization could continue operating according to civilized principles and face destruction by external predators who didn't share those principles, or they could alliance themselves with internal predators who could teach them to fight effectively against external threats. Ambassador Chun, Captain Veltar said slowly, you're essentially asking us to choose between maintaining our civilized nature and surviving external threats. We're asking you to evolve your understanding of what civilization means, Dr. Vasquez replied. Most galactic civilizations define themselves in opposition to their predatory origins. Humans define civilization as the controlled application of predatory capabilities for protective rather than aggressive purposes. The choice isn't between being civilized and being predatory, Sarah added. The choice is between being naive prey and being sophisticated predators who choose to protect rather than hunt. Admiral Harrison provided the final element of a human argument. Representatives, the universe is not a civilized place. Civilization is an artificial construct that exists only as long as civilized beings are capable of defending it against uncivilized threats. Recent events suggest that such threats are imminent and significant. What specific threats? Thexmar demanded. Sarah exchanged glances with her colleagues before responding. High Counselor, human intelligence assets have detected evidence of at least 3 distinct external civilizations conducting reconnaissance operations in galactic space. Each appears to possess military capabilities that significantly exceed current galactic defensive capacity. Moreover, Dr. Vasquez added, these civilizations appear to be coordinating their activities and sharing intelligence about galactic capabilities and vulnerabilities. The Vorthen operation was essentially a live-fire test of galactic military response, Admiral Harrison concluded. They now know exactly how galactic forces respond to conventional military threats, and they're developing countermeasures accordingly. The implications were staggering. While galactic civilization had been congratulating itself on resolving the Vorthen crisis through unprecedented cooperation, hostile external forces have been gathering comprehensive intelligence about their military capabilities, coordination methods, and tactical responses. What do you recommend?